Good. All right. Well, so that's when I walked up to the bar and said, "No, you can't scan my badge. I would just like a martini." So, hello everyone. My name is Mick Baccio. We're a very special edition of Coffee Talk with Serge. We're here at RSA Conference. I'm sitting with Juan, Andres, Guerrero-Saade, and John DiMaggio, who have joined me today to talk about Bluenomicon, the book that we just released here at RSA, and is yours free if you stop on by the booth. So first, for folks that don't know who you are, which I don't know anyone that doesn't know Jags, tell me who you are, your background a bit, and like how you got to get hooked up with this project. Your name?
Yeah, it caught me for a bit when I was thinking about how I ended up on this project. So I'm Juan Guerrero-Saade, Jags, to my friends and people who don't speak Spanish. And I lead research over at Sentinel-1, so Sentinel Labs team, and I'm over at the Alperovich Institute with Thomas Ridd and those fine folks, just doing way too many things at once. So of course, when Mick pings me on Signal and goes, "Hey, I need you to write a thing,"
I said there was a please emoji.
There was I need you to write a thing. I'm like, yeah, definitely. I definitely can do this. So of course I submitted it like 10 days late, as Mick was writing me every single day asking for the story. And I'm very happy to be part of this project.
Thank you. And next up we've got John DiMaggio.
Yeah, so I didn't know we could turn them in later. I would have done that. Yeah, so I'm John DiMaggio. I am the chief security strategist at Analyst One, or what I prefer to go by as Bad Guy Chaser. And you know, I've known these guys for a long time, but you know, throughout my career in nation state stuff, and transitioned to ransomware recently. But yeah, Mick called and said, "Hey, you know, you just wrote your own book. You know, why don't you come write one with us?" And we did that. But I am pretty sure, because you asked me 2 days before it was due, and I think it's because even my texts are like 3 paragraphs long. So I think that your way of reeling me in so that I wouldn't write a book. But if I knew I could have turned it in late.
To be fair, that's not an option. We would prefer if you didn't do that. It's just with all the money I wasn't paying you, I figured that I couldn't really be that demanding. And John, I figured you were like, you know, you had just published a book. So I figured you were in a writing mood, you know, yes. Juices were flowing. I'm like, oh, let me write some more about ransomware.
Right. That's not how that works. Like, as somebody who's being very truant in the process of writing a book right now.
Because you and Lorenzo
and I, let me put this the right way. Lorenzo is currently writing a book on Hacking Team that I'm also meant to be writing with him. And no, he's fantastic. He's doing amazing work on that front, and I'm trying to keep up. But yeah, we're in the middle of that project.
Everything I read from Lorenzo is pretty amazing. So I think it's gonna be a fantastic book. Yeah. Looking forward to it. So you're both published authors walking into this, and now you're published again. Jump right in. You were both in the section, the tail end. We have this Bluenomicon's broken into 3 sections. First section is, you know, leadership strategies from folks like Sherry DeGrepo, Rick Holland, Wendy Nather. And the second section is some technical strategies from folks like Jack Crook and Josh Liberty. And I wanted you two, for the last section, kind of the blue team incident response tales, just your backgrounds in operations. You know, you wrote about some Dooku stuff you were tracking, and you wrote about some ransomware actors. APT ransomware, I think that's like, it's the cool kids club, right? If you're not doing one, you're doing the other. It's what it is. So what drew you to that side of it? Like you focus heavily on ransomware.
Most of my career,
not nation state.
Right.
And you're kind of the opposite. How did that happen?
So it's actually a funny story. It was May 12th, 2017 at Symantec. My boss came to me and said, "Hey, we've got ransomware stuff popping up everywhere. I need you to look at it." And I looked at him and I said, "Dude, can't you get somebody else to do that?" And it ended up being WannaCry. Boy, did I put my foot in my mouth. And you know, it's kind of been going since then. You know, it was like all the TTPs from all the great reports that we've all put out over the years on nation state stuff. They sort of took that and started using that, you know, for ransomware attacks. And you know, once I got in kind of the cat and mouse, and then realized there's, you know, the human side to it, and these guys were actually out on the dark web, and you could go and track them down that way, and it added a whole nother layer of hierarchy. It just kind of really got my interest going, and I haven't been able to turn back. I do miss nation state work, but I love what I've been doing. It's just been really exciting. So I'm just going where the stories have been taking me.
Jags, what about you? How far back have you been tracking this for a while? and not specific set or specific group, just the field, like, you know, just best of breed, I guess, is what I've seen you do. So how did you first get hooked up? Like, I want to track state actors.
So I came at this in a completely tangential way. So definitely more on the intelligence analysis side, and just transitioned into cyber because it's where the interesting things were happening. Like I think we're in a really special time in intelligence history where I don't think this has ever happened before, where so many third parties can basically watch and interfere in active intelligence operations around the world, and we do it from the comfort of our own homes. And for a complexity fetishist, that is like the ultimate, you know, toy. It's just new puzzles every day, new exciting things. I've been way too dismissive of crimeware in the past, and I'll be the first to admit that I think that was living in a paradigm of the crimeware I saw when I first kicked off into the industry, where it was, you know, banking Trojans and
Well, it was ransomware, like your computer singularly is locked.
$400 and you lost the pictures of your kids.
Let her off, and then that shift, you know, and I think it's of that age now where ransomware actors and nation state actors, there's a pretty big pocketbook they can both draw from.
Yeah, there's definitely overlap these days.
Right.
Absolutely, there's some overlap where one is leveraging the other for sure.
I think the first for me, way back 2015, you look at the Guardians of Peace thing, the Sony intrusion. That was the first time for me. I remember, oh, that's an interesting little bit at the end there. That's all right. We're gonna take all the things and poof. And now that's standard SOP. That's just, it's exactly what everyone's doing. Do you have any opinions about what brought that shift on, other than it works?
Yeah, well, I'd go to argue that it doesn't work, because even to this day, you know, we're seeing these guys that are creating these personas to do that the day before they use them. And so I don't even think they care that it's believable. The whole point is just to have plausible deniability, regardless of what anyone thinks. But yeah, obviously that began, you know, Russia made that into an art, you know, back, you know, even before the US election, you had, you know, the French election interference, and the German election interference. And, you know, so just the three combined kind of made that playbook. But now you see threat actors doing that. You saw with the Lockbit developer when he released that stolen code to their builder last September, did the same thing, created two fake accounts to do it.
Ransomware developers, these things wouldn't happen. I just think it shows that ecosystem. Folks, pay your developers or else you're going to have a bad day. I thought that was an interesting. And for the backstory on that, it was a Lockbit developer who did not get their paycheck.
He did not get his paycheck, and you know, it was $100 million plus year for Lockbit, and he couldn't pay his developer, you know, the money that he owed him. And
there are macroeconomic headwinds everywhere. I mean, even in the cybercrime ecosystem. So I understand he wouldn't get his tithe. So him not getting paid, it's, oh, fine, here's some source code. You didn't need that, did you? And that's...
They didn't read the leadership lessons of the first section of the book. So, you know, we'll ship them a copy.
There's a section for you. We're doing a ransomware version next. But Lockbit does seem to have, you were their flavor of the month. And we were talking about this a bit earlier.
I did not know this. I just found out about this like 45 minutes ago. Yeah.
So it was you interacted directly with the Lockbit admins, and hey, change their profile picture to you. And who's going to play you in the movie they wanted?
They told me that I was a handsome man, and that if there's a movie that they thought Bruce Willis, a combination of Bruce Willis or Chuck Norris should play my role. I see the Bruce Willis. Right, the Chuck Norris.
Which Chuck Norris? Like Walker, Texas Ranger Chuck Norris, or like Missing in Action Chuck Norris? Because there's a difference. I know it's a deep pull. The first
but it made me laugh because, you know, I did that whole thing with fake personas, and after the report came out, I get the message to one of my fake personas, except it says, "Hey Johnny." And it went from there.
What about you? Have you, in your research, have you had any pings back to you?
Yeah, in some cases. I mean, nation state stuff is interesting because there's a part of it where you get overt references, and then there's the kind of like winks and nudges where it's just like, oh, great work, and now could you please stop, right? The more overt stuff is actually quite interesting, and as we talk about sort of hacktivism, this happened, I want to say, about a year ago, shortly after the invasion of Ukraine and all this hacking of Russian institutions happened, you know, all the hack and leak operations. So I get a ping from a reporter. He's like, "Hey man, is this email from you?" I'm look at it, and it's like releasing some Belarusian defense contractor like leaked data, and it's signed off like what was it? Glory to Ukraine and fuck Putin, and my name. I'm like, I mean, no.
That's exactly how I talk. Yep, that's me. That's it.
Change my email signature right there and then. But no, you get these little over, references every once in a while. It's fun, man. I don't know. I have no sense of survival, so for me, it's just kind of like a nice back and forth, right?
So, do you see an evolution in nation state or an evolution in ransomware operators? Like, we're at RSA this week, our RSA conference now. We're at RSA conference this week, and you can't go 3 feet without hearing about generative AI. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. My takeaway so far is I've heard phishing will get worse, which is weird because phishing is already like top of the food chain. So I don't. What do you think would be an example of adversarial capability being expanded through ChatGPT?
So to me, and I'm super bought into this, right? Like, which is kind of funny because if we had this conversation 6 months ago, I would have been like,
we wouldn't have had this conversation 6 months ago, right? And it's
ML, AI,
that's
like,
stupid.
What are you selling?
You mean
me,
stats?
bro? Yeah, which is hilarious because I was really not about it, and now I'm super bought into it, right? Like we did this malware analysis course that like used ChatGPT to level people up and like all this stuff. But if you ask me, the reality of what AI affects or what generative AI advances affect are really mundane. And in the sense that they're the kind of things that we don't want to talk about, right? Like the real catastrophic effects of the expansion of generative AI are going to be structural unemployment and economic headwinds that people don't want to talk about. And when we're talking about sort of the adversary space, I think if it has the potential to genuinely affect anything, it's the kind of attacks that require a lot of social interaction and that none of us, except Ronnie, want to track, like BEC or romance scams, where it's like, oh, I can suddenly scale up having a conversation with a man or a woman who's lonely somewhere and convince them that we're in love.
Same
and
thing.
ask them for money, right?
Like the same thing. Sean Gallagher and the team at Sophos, all the work they're doing on pig butchering.
Right.
I think because that lends itself. My prediction on it is just if you're able to conduct that level of research. When we talk about operations, like offensive operations, the planning stage is the biggest stage. It always has been. Tip for you Wintel kids out there. Planning is the first one. It's the longest one, and I think AI would help that. Just to I don't know where to look for something, but hey, I'm trying to find all these documents, and I can have that done for me. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, and on top of that, let's just look at it. If you were to take a lot of the tools that we use as researchers, a lot of the open source free tools that applied in addition to AI, you could do a lot of that sort of initial reconnaissance, finding all the public facing email, finding all the public facing infrastructure, what vulnerabilities might be present, things of that nature, actually deploying vulnerabilities. I mean, you could take the human element completely out of that with AI. At the same time, done well, I would say you could do the same thing with for defensive purposes. So I think it could go back and forth. Unfortunately, I want to say that we seem to always be chasing the bad guys. So I think that it'll really depend on how well they utilize that to see how we're going to react in implementing it better in our own technologies.
I think in the criminal ecosystem, it's just, well, at least in the generative AI ecosystem, it's who monetizes it first, right? The cybercrime element or the vendor world, right? It's just
the nation state first. Like I haven't heard any bad guys, in the ransomware cybercrime world talking about developing that. Even the developers themselves. I think it'll happen, but I think the trend usually is we see stuff from nation states and then we see it being reused by
cybercrime actors. Like internally, we're using generative AI. It's like you mentioned, it's an augment to staff. Like I suck at Python. I am not great, and I don't need to be. Right. I don't have to be great. I can just, hey, look, I want to try and do this. Well, try this, Mick. That didn't work. Well, try this instead. And it worked. And I'm like, oh, look, I know I shouldn't say that when my boss sitting in the room, but yeah, I'm successful and I have AI to thank for that. It's really,
it has 10x'd me from a 0.5x engineer to something that looks like a 5x engineer, but it's entirely chat. So look,
you mentioned the classes, having students use that. I think Chris Sanders, one of the classes he had recently, same thing. They're using that to help out just the foundational concepts and principles that you can just teach very easily, or that AI will be able to spit back to you. Here's the investigative trail you would follow, and here's the why behind it. And I think that's what's really going to help level up analysts.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Funny story. I asked Chat GPT, is that the right acronym? I asked it. I said, I threw in all my reports and a bunch of other things from over the years, and pointed it toward some directories that had a lot of reporting. And I asked it. I said, "Where's Lockbit from?" And it told me it was from the U.S. And I was like, okay. And it's basing that probably because it seems there's so many victims in the U.S. So then I went and asked Lockbit. I said, "Hey, where are you from?" And he said, "I'm in the U.S." And I said, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Yeah, I own a couple restaurants in New York City." And of course, neither of them are accurate, but I thought it was really amusing that they both, the actual person behind it and the AI, told me the same thing. So maybe they're right and I'm wrong.
Maybe that's the way to go. But
Right.
what I love most about generative AI is the confidence in which it's wrong.
A white man's confidence.
Look, I don't want
to. You know?
I'm not touching that.
Dude, I'm telling you, there's a power there. That a confidence in everything you
Hey,
say.
Jenna, tell what's my bio, and it'll tell me all the things I have not done that are amazing, and it's just the way wow, Mick is doing really good work here.
And then he died, and we're like, oh, okay, epic story, bro. No, I'm a huge fan, but I think it's really important to understand how it works so that you understand precisely where the inevitable pitfalls are. Like, people started talking about hallucinations, which is great that folks understood, right? It has that confidence. Once it runs out of runway, it's gonna start just making stuff up for you and kind of give you that. I think there's a lot about, there's minutia you can get into about sort of the locality of where you end up when you write a prompt. It puts you in a certain part of the model, and it'll answer things relevant to that. And to me, the real issue is right now, it's not iterative. It doesn't understand that, like, we're having a conversation, ChatGPT and I, and then I go, well, actually, this is wrong. From this point forward, use this API instead.
Right.
The next answer is correct. The next interaction, it goes back to the understanding that it had before. Like, there's a lack of temporality that hasn't been solved. And
but to that end, I think the different versions that are coming out, the Moore's law being what it is, the space between the versions is getting shorter. The timelines in which are getting released is shrinking, and the capabilities just between like 3.5 and 4 is amazing. So, and just the size, right? I think it'll get to the point where, oh, look, I've got an LLM downloaded locally to my watch. And
that's when we have the real problems with discussions we were having before about BEC and romance scams and anything that's social interaction. Right now, look, OpenAI is killing it. They're 10 times better than anybody else's stuff. I don't care what Google says or whomever. OpenAI is clearly doing much better. However, if I need to connect to OpenAI in order to run my 4,000 scams a day, it's a trust and safety problem, right? You've got folks in their trust and safety team who have to monitor those accounts. They can kill those interactions. They can manage those prompts. The minute I can run, a decent LLM at home with like $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in ill-gotten gains, and from this point forward, like, the pig butchering is on steroids, then we have a truly insurmountable,
that's a critical mass, right?
And that's what scares me. That's the point, I think, where we're really going to have some problems.
Well, it's a good thing we have bring this back, a collection of stories in Bluenomicon. You see, I plugged that bag of leadership strategies. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get this book together and release it out was because of conversations like this and stories like this. We've been going to conferences for a super long time. Back when DEF CON wasn't almost $500. Like, the best times I've had are in the talks themselves, but the conversations you're having after, just those trains of thought, people you're going to see once or twice a year because you don't hang out with each other except when you go to conferences, which is awkward.
20 minutes from each other back home.
So, the idea of collecting those stories was important to me and that tribal knowledge. So I want to ask both of you individually, we're going to wrap this up a little. Why is contributing to a project like Bluenomicon important? And John, I'll start with you.
Sure. What I really think is, you've got a lot of, young upcoming people, sort of that next generation that are coming into doing this type of work. And, I remember when I started, like, security wasn't even really a big thing. Now, yeah, I'm a dinosaur, but, I remember having to argue why we needed to have, a position that strictly was about security and looking at advanced threats and things of that nature. And, the reason that it's so important today is because of all of those stories, all of the things that we learned the hard way to get here. And so many of those are by word of mouth. And so I think it's really important that we start documenting that. We have examples of that. We detailed these stories. We have things that you can reference. And I think that's what's really good about this book and taking part in it is, it really is helping to create sort of that history that you can go back and really look and see how we got here.
What about you, Jags?
It's kind of funny.
You can't use any of the same answer.
None of it, right? Yeah. No, I think it's actually kind of funny because I hadn't thought about it until you asked the question. And I mean that, like, completely honest, right? You asked, so I did it. And that if I'm honest, that's why it happened. Now, when I think about it, it actually takes me back to a conference that you put together. In Vegas, was part of sort of like Splunk's big conference. We had this sort of nice
the Insider Minicon we did
Right.
last year at Comp.
Yeah.
Right.
So we had a Minicon, and you're kind enough to ask me to keynote. And my talk there was titled On Narratives, right? Like, it was about the problem that we have with the fact that, like, journalists of every stripe, right? Some really amazing ones, some really terrible ones, are the ones largely telling our stories,
right,
and codifying them in ways that are accessible to a larger set of folks, which we want to reach. We want people to join. We have more work than we have folks for. Like, this is very much an industry that welcome an influx of workers. But most of what you would find in an accessible form was at best mildly inaccurate.
Okay.
In some cases, egregiously inaccurate. So, like, so you have, and I Kim doesn't like me saying this, but, like, you have sort of like the Setter-Perlroth spectrum, right? Like, from like great to terrible, and you're going to get any version of that in between. And the truth is that until we start telling our stories and codifying things, you can't be upset about that, because there is no other reference for you to say, look, this is how it happened. This is, all of us are super busy. It's not like we're sitting around, I don't know, live blogging how we got to certain issues. Look at Microsoft, right? Like, the Mystic has been doing unbelievable work on Ukraine for the past year and a half. The people that have written the least publicly are them, because they're busy doing the work. Right. So I think a project like this is super important, and hopefully it's the beginning of more things, precisely so that you can look at those people who want to get into the space, who want to understand what's going on, and say, okay, well, here's your book list, here's your references of what you should be looking at.
And there's another great book with a lot of stories in it. It's called The Art of Cyber Warfare.
It's available. We'll get to that. No. So, speaking of fantastic books like Bluenomicon, The Art of Cyber Warfare, if you wanted a copy, you can stop by the Moscone, North 5770. That's where our booth is. And I'll be there this afternoon with John, whose book, The Art of Cyber Warfare, will be there, available and signed as well. Can you tell us a bit about that and just show a bit for me?
Yeah, we're gonna give out some free copies, but it's the first half of it is just it's mostly nation state, because that's what I worked so much at the time. Well, the first half of it's just really cool stories, lessons learned, what happens when we do things wrong. There's a chapter in there on ransomware. The second half, though, is really for your CTI analyst, how to do attribution, something very near and dear to my heart. How to go through and actually do analysis, how to read through, a phishing email, starting at the bottom, looking at the header. What are the fields that are unique that you need to focus on? Just everything that I sort of learned as a basic early on as a junior analyst, all the way to being very senior and doing nation state research and things of that nature. So it's just sort of steps 1 through 10 on how to do it, and cool stories to show you why you need to do it. So
I'm looking forward to it. I'll see you in the booth later this afternoon. Jags, where are you going to be this week? We're at RSA Conference. What's Sentinel One got going on?
Well, ideally, I'll be everywhere except the show floor. I'm trying to avoid the vendoriness. The only thing that might take me there is actually, seeing the launch. As far as what S1 has going, we have the FOMO party tonight. Cascade is playing. Should be a pretty good show for folks.
So the volume stays about a 6. I think I'll be. It's
we'll have
by
like
9,
insulated room somewhere with like napping pods. I think for all of us ancient folks, but.
My wife says it's too loud. I have to leave.
I made this for us.
Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to sit down and chat with me. We're definitely going to do this again. And to everyone watching, thank you for tuning in today. Check out Bluenomicon, check out Sentinel One and Analyst One and all the great work that John and Jags are doing. And we'll be back in 7 days with another episode of Coffee Talk. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you soon.
Surge.